Good afternoon, everyone, from the IBD Newsroom. Welcome to Stock Market Today. My name is Ken Shreve, joined today by Justin Nielsen. On today's show, we'll take a look at more new highs for the Dow and S&P 500. Strong close for the NASDAQ, which outperformed again and is very close to an all-time high. And, also a big drop in the 10-year Treasury yield. But before we get into all that, let me throw it over to Justin because something tells me he's got three stocks to look at today.
Why not? On a Thursday, let's do it. It's going to be Artisan Partners today, which was also our stock of the day. We'll also take a look at PRA Health Sciences and end out with just a little semiconductor wrap up, looking at the Banach Vectors Semiconductor ETF.
Okay, well, very good. Let's take a look at the indexes at the close here. NASDAQ looks like it ends with a gain of 1.3%. The S&P 500 up 1.1%. Dow up 0.9%. Small caps lag today, only up 0.3% as it trades. Russell 2000 trades near its 200-day moving average. But let's start by taking a look at the NASDAQ. Justin, this was a day where money not only flowed into stocks, but also flowed into bonds. Maybe we can get into that, talk about that 10-year Treasury yield. But let's start with the look at the NASDAQ here.
Yeah, I mean, what's not to like? Here we are, getting back to new high territory. And actually, if you look at the Qs, which tracks the NASDAQ 100, those actually got to new highs a couple days ago and just kind of continued their movement into new high ground. So, this is, again, kind of one of those things where the heavyweights in there, Google, Apple, Amazon, Adobe, Facebook, these guys have such heavy weights in the NASDAQ composite themselves, and even more so in the NASDAQ 100. And that's one of the driving forces behind some of this resurgence in tech. Now, some of your older names, those are getting back above their 50-day moving average lines, but it's really those big guys that are driving a lot of the gains in the NASDAQ indexes, whether it's the composite or the NASDAQ 100.
Most definitely. All right, taking a look at the SPY here, the S&P 500 ETF, another new high. We've been talking about a lot of light volume in the market here. You can see down at the bottom, not much volume again on the NYSE today, but S&P 500 is not going to be stopped.
Well, and the S&P 500 never really took much of a break. I mean, you had the very brief move down below the 50-day moving average line at the beginning of March. But since then, this has been, just a really strong move. And it kind of just goes to show how, those heavyweights that we were talking about for the NASDAQ, they're in the S&P 500 as well, but when a lot of these reopening and cyclical plays, the steel stocks, the energy stocks, bank stocks, all of those were also having a lot of strength, the S&P 500 kind of had that broader participation. And, when tech was out of favor, a day here or a day there, S&P 500 was still able to, make those new highs and look a lot stronger. And then we shouldn't forget, because this is something you actually mentioned on IBD Live today, to look at the 10-year Treasury, which if you're a MarketSmith user, you can get to using 0 TNX.
Zero
Which is the 10-year
TNX,
Treasury. Yeah, and
is.
this is looking at the Treasury yields. So as you mentioned, a lot of money flowing into bonds, which when that happens, it has an inverse relationship with the yield. So more money into bonds and bond prices going up, yields fall. And you see quite a drop that happened in the 10-year Treasury, which you noted very early this morning, and it just kind of dropped even further from there.
Yeah, the bond yields fell even more, which was a little bit curious because the economic data was so good before the open. We had a very strong reading in March retail sales. We had a couple of pieces of manufacturing data, the Philly Fed Manufacturing Index, Empire State Manufacturing, all better than expected, and a big, larger than expected drop in weekly jobless claims. But you can see this 10-year note here has really been riding this 50-day moving higher, 50-day moving average higher forever, closing in on a test here. So we'll see. We'll see if the 10-year yield eventually bottoms out. But at last check, it was down about 8 basis points to 1.53%. All right. Well, let's talk a few stocks here. The first name we're going to talk about is actually a pretty nice looking breakout today from Artisan Partners Asset Management.
Right, and this was one that we also talked about on IBD Live this morning. I got an alert on my MarketSmith program. That does send alerts out when there's breakouts, and APAM, had a very nice, as you mentioned, a very nice looking chart. Now, this is also there's a fundamental story behind this as well. As we were discussing this is a this is a stock where we've talked a lot about, they're in the finance industry. They have all of these different funds, and these are some funds that we've been highlighting in Investors Business Daily because of their strength over multiple timeframes. Whether you look at a 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, 10 year, some of their funds have just incredible records of performance, including their small cap fund. I was taking a look at that. Their Artisan Small Cap Investor Fund, which has a ticker symbol of ARTSX, the mutual fund, that has a 10-year average annual return of 18.7%, including a 61% return in 2020. So a lot of good, stock picking by this management team. And so this was a stock of the day. But it's also interesting to take a look at some of these mutual funds because they are definitely an outperformer in their space.
Yeah, definitely. You can see revenue growth accelerating over the past 2 quarters at Artisan from 15% up to 25%. Looks like we're going to hear from them earnings-wise in a couple of weeks. Good volume behind the breakout today, closed near highs. RS line lagging a little bit, RS rating of 74, but boy, it was good volume behind the breakout today. So
well, and the relative strength line, it kind of makes sense a little bit when you consider that this has been basing lately, whereas the S&P 500 has been going into that new high ground, as you showed earlier. So you kind of have to forgive it a little bit that, yes, its relative strength is going to be a little bit, on the lower side, that relative strength line, I should say, because that is referencing versus the S&P 500.
Stocks building bases, stocks consolidating gains when the market is going up are just going to have a relative strength line that starts to flatten out. All right. So that's APAM. Next, we want to take a look at PRAH. They call this a contract research organization. PRAH is the symbol here, and a nice solid move for this name too.
And we were talking a lot about these kind of these support systems for a lot of the biotech industry. And what really kind of stuck out to me was this broke out last week, or a couple of weeks ago. And look at the volume today and the strength of today's action compared to that breakout. So this was still in the buy range. And so if you saw this action today, we actually again talked about this on IBD Live. It's something where this was actionable still. And again, I actually like this day better than the previous breakout. A lot of volume today, a lot of strength. And, this is where sometimes if you have that breakout, it's a little tentative. Sometimes you have to give some stocks some room. They might just, pull back a little bit or consolidate, go sideways a little bit. That's what looks like it happened here for PRAH. But today's action was certainly had the look of institutional investors getting involved.
Yeah, I think a lot of stocks in this group were strong. We mentioned earlier today, again on IBD Live, there was a big acquisition. Thermo Fisher Scientific bought PPD, which is another member of this research equipment services group. Similar business to PRA Health Sciences, but ticker PPD was acquired by Thermo Fisher Scientific earlier today for $17.4 billion. All right, finally, let's take a look. Boy, we're talking a lot about semiconductors. As semiconductors go, so goes the NASDAQ. But let's take a look at, I think it was SMH we wanted to look at.
And actually, I think, there were a number of semiconductors that were actually showing more strength relative to the NASDAQ composite for a while. I mean, you had stocks like AMAT, Applied Materials, that was, really, showing a lot of strength versus the NASDAQ. But as a group, now that the NASDAQ is kind of getting itself out of that corrective phase that it was in, at the end of February and most of March, this is starting to look a lot better. And it's formed a pattern here. So it's come right back up to the highs. Now it's kind of trickled off a little bit, kind of forming that handle action. So this looks set up to potentially go again. And it has a lot of different ways you could play this. If you wanted to go, deeper dive into some of the names, they're not all created equal. You have some like NVIDIA that we mentioned on Stock Market Today on Monday that have been looking really strong. AMAT that was a little bit earlier of a move, but there's a lot of strength in this group. Not all of them are participating, but SMH kind of gives you enough of a blanket around the semiconductor industries that you're going to be able to participate with those winners as well. And then you also have other options in terms of if you wanted to juice that up. There's leverage ETFs that you could use. USD has as the Pro Shares, that gives you a 2x on the semiconductor move of the US Dow Jones Semiconductor Index. And then you also have SOXL, which is a 3x on the move of the semiconductor industry. So if you wanted a little bit more juice to the performance, and if this does break out, USD already looks like it did break out today, but those are some other ways that you could play this space.
Yeah, very interesting to see the semiconductor stocks and semiconductor ETFs setting up with the NASDAQ just off an all-time high and possibly poised for a breakout itself. All right. Well, Justin, thanks so much for those three names. Great insight as always. And that's going to do it for today's show. So we have talked about IBD Live. If you haven't checked out IBD Live, we go on the air every morning at 6:20 a.m. Pacific time, about 10 minutes before the market open, 9:20 Eastern time. We're talking about what's happening in the market. We're talking about actionable setups when they arise. A lot of education as well. So if you want to take a 2-week trial and see what we're talking about Monday through Friday, you can do that at investors.com/IBD Live. Until then, well, I guess we'll see you tomorrow. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll conclude the week tomorrow. Have a great night, everybody.